Okay. Hello, Matt, and thanks for joining us in Scouted by GreyB. And right away, I'd like to ask about Boox. And when I actually was reading about Boox, the first catchy thing that I noticed was the name. So, Boox, can you give me a little bit background about why this name, the story behind it?
Yeah, it's not a great story, really. It was kind of just a fun take on the word box. And what we do is supply reusable alternatives to single-use items and manage the collection and reuse of them. And we just wanted something a little bit fun and something that would stop and force you to think about a little bit and say, oh, okay, this is not a box, right? It's a Boox. And what does that mean? Why is it different? Um, and I think we wanted something that's a little bit catchy and almost always people mispronounce it, and it's kind of part of the fun is that you have to then talk about it and it's a conversation starter.
So, yeah, it is catchy. So, Matt, if you have to like summarize what Boox is doing in maybe two, three lines, so what that is going to be?
Yeah, for sure. So we don't think of ourselves as a packaging company. We think of ourselves as a platform for circular economy and reuse. Right, so we're enabling companies to reuse things that formerly were only single use, and we'll probably get more into this. But importantly, it's kind of a system and a behavior change that we're trying to achieve, not just a product. Right, so ultimately, consumers need to participate in the circular economy for it to work. And in order to do that, we need to make it convenient and affordable and maybe delightful to get people to do that. It can't just be incentives or negative, punishments for not doing it. It has to be a positive feeling to really create lasting consumer behavior change. And so that's hard to define sometimes, but I think that is ultimately what the challenges that we're facing is that we need to fundamentally change the system of how waste works if we want to make a dent in circular economy of single-use waste.
Yeah, that I mean, I totally agree with you. It's very difficult to bring up a behavior change of things that has been like doing. People have been doing the same way, just order something, throw the box away, and that is something that we want to change. So Matt, basically, this recovery and circular economy concept, it has existed for a very long time, and I've seen a lot of startup doing similar things in different part of the countries or different part of the globe. What has been the biggest challenge on making books happen, or basically operating books?
Yeah, I think we've had a lot of success, and I think I'm a very optimistic person. So it's hard for me to think about challenges because I think it's life
Hmm.
is pretty good from where I sit. The hardest things maybe were just the time frame in which we started the company and operated in. So the company was founded in 2019. About
Yeah.
6 months later, the pandemic happened here in the U.S. with lockdown, and as you can imagine, trying to encourage people to reuse things during COVID was challenging because they said, "Oh, I don't want to touch something that somebody else has touched." To that
Hmm.
extent, 6 months later, we had one of the global crises in supply chain with products being caught in ports and especially in the Middle East, there was congestion. And so, not to mention war in Ukraine, all sorts of things. Elections here in the U.S. that have changed climate policy. There's just some real global challenges that for any company starting this period would be relevant. But for us, where we actually have a physical product that's produced in 4 different countries in the world and shipped to many more countries, those challenges are real for us. And I think credit to our team for kind of handling it with aplomb and with grace. And I do believe in the idea that if you start a company during a difficult time, you're actually stronger for it and leaner and more disciplined. So that's been a great learning process. But if we had to choose, we would have chosen to not have those global challenges, certainly for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, I think you could say it like tough times create stronger startups.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
I
really
believe
good.
that, and actually, I've started companies during some of the most challenging times in the U.S. Certainly for recession and various industries. So I do think it ultimately, if you can get through it, it's really strong and character building for the company.
Okay, I totally understand, and I think a similar trend was seen in among all the startup that were those were catering to FMCG industry or basically any kind of product industry because everything was clogged and stopped. What has been the driving force behind Book's growth or basically Book's survivability during those tough times as well?
Yeah, I think we latched on to a slightly different strategy than some others that have tried to do what we're doing successfully. And many companies in this space have done things like make a product that is considering a future state where reuse and circularity is commonplace and everybody does it and it's how it works. And we believe in that future as well, but I think it's probably 10 years away. And so I think we've done a very good job of developing products and services that work today while envisioning what might work in the future as well and how to get there. And understanding that, especially when it comes to consumer behavior change, you can't just assume everybody will get it. And tomorrow when this product launches, it will work, right? It has to work within the infrastructure that we have today. That's also one of the challenges, is that we know over time the infrastructure has to change for this to really work globally. And so we have to take a long view, right? It can't just be, oh, we're going to launch this thing and by next year everything's going to work perfectly. We have to consider the sort of stepping stone process to get to where we want to be in 10 years. And I think many companies that struggled or failed to do this said, oh, consumers are going to do this because it's the right thing to do. That would be great. But unfortunately, I just don't think that that's been successful, right? There's been a lot of examples where that has not worked, especially for sustainability efforts. So you have to think, as much as it is a pragmatic way to think, you have to think like, how is this going to make money for the companies using it? Not just how is it going to reduce impact? And I think too many competitors have thought, oh, companies will do it because it's good for the planet. Some will, certainly, the 1%, 5% maybe, but most will say, well, first, it has to make financial sense for our business. Second, it would be great if we could also reduce impact. And so I think we've had that attitude and understanding from the beginning that both those things have to be true for us to be successful.
Yeah, and I think when I was reading Boox website, and that is what surprised me as well. And I totally agree with you. It's not only a very small fraction of companies will adopt a new thing purely because of sustainability. Of course, you always have to justify the price. And I saw on Boox website, you were saying that your packaging costs just the same as a normal cardboard box packaging. So how are you able to do that?
Yeah, it took us a while to get there. Or a different way of saying it, we've always structured pricing in that way, knowing that clients would demand it, right? Would say like, I can't switch unless it's the same cost or lower, right? Or it actually saves us money to switch. And there's this idea of switching costs, right? It costs money to switch to anything for these brands, especially large, operationally complex brands. It's not like they can just start using a new product tomorrow. And so we have to demonstrate either cost savings or added value or both, right? To get somebody to switch. It can't just be, oh, this is the right thing, so we'll switch. And so I think that we had to recognize that early on. And so we priced the product on par with cardboard boxes to generate interest and demand. And so when a large company says, oh, let's look into this, we're interested in sustainable packaging. Oh, this is a viable option, so let's go explore it. The first check is this, can we afford this? Right? Does this make financial sense? So we are a venture-backed startup. That gave us the ability from the beginning to say, okay, today we're going to lose money servicing clients at this price, but we can see a path to lowering our costs where we can make a gross profit margin eventually at scale. And so we achieved that scale about 18 months ago, which was a huge milestone for us as a company. But we've always said, it must be price competitive. It's not like, oh, we have to charge 3 times more until our costs drop. We have to charge this, and then over time with scale, we'll drop our costs.
Okay, Matt. So basically, the strategy behind the pricing and cost saving is Boox intentionally prices itself in competition of normal boxes, and down the line you are trying to figure out how to lower down the cost until you have the funding, venture-backed funding. Have I summarized it right?
Yeah, more meaning we've achieved that. We've achieved a positive gross margin. But we knew it would take a certain amount of scale to get there that we wouldn't have on day one. And if that's the case, then you need funding to bridge from day one to today, because you're going to lose money servicing clients until then, right? And it really lights a fire. You can see we're losing money. Okay, now we're making money, and we can map that out. And we missed by a few months, but again, I think it was partially because of challenges with supply chain. Right, so we could have probably gotten there sooner if not for those challenges, which is very, it drives a lot of anxiety and makes it challenging. But we can always model it out, right? We can model out, okay, at this scale and with a ton of research and understanding of it, at scale X, we can achieve profitability. We just need to get there, right? We need to survive long enough and get enough clients to get there.
That's great. So if you have a collection network through which like Boox operates. I mean, that is what I was able to understand after looking into Boox. So basically compared to a traditional competition of Boox, so what you have extra is a collection network through which users can send their boxes back or send the packaging back. Basically, that's how you contribute. So compared to them, it's like you already have another thing to manage and operate the network maintain those connections, and it's always easier to just throw the books away compared to going outside and just returning it. So that was the like root of my question of regarding cost. So how is Boox able to maintain that network as well, so and still have the profitability? So how have you achieved the profitability in past,
Yeah, I
in
can
both?
explain this both conceptually and how it works for Boox. You said it's easier to throw something away, and that's a very loaded word, right? It might be more convenient,
Convenient.
and that's a different way of saying easier. It's also unpleasant for people. And so if you're in the US and you receive a bunch of packages a day, the average is something like a dozen packages a week for the average household. You're folding down cardboard boxes. You have a knife and you're removing tape and you're flattening them and you're putting them in the recycling bin. And then they go to a facility probably not that close to you. It's in a neighboring town or something like that. It's not a positive experience. And in fact, there's many Reddit threads about breaking down cardboard boxes and how frustrating it is and how ridiculous it is, how much packaging we need for these products. So it's not as though it's a positive thing for people that we're trying to replace. And so that was the starting point, is okay, we just need to be better than that, right? It needs to be a better experience than that. For in most cases with Boox products, and it's not just boxes, but other types of packaging that's reusable as well, you're asked to go to a local place to return it, as opposed to putting it in your bin. Some of our products, this is one of the newest ones, this is the Boox bag, which is a multi-use poly bag. This one in the US, you can actually just put in your mail from home. And so this one is actually directly on par in terms of convenience as it is of throwing this in your garbage bin. And that is always the goal, is that we need to be as convenient or somehow more positive than that, right? And that's where it gets a little bit tricky with consumer behavior. So what the kind of idea we came up with was, well, what if you get rewarded for returning these boxes? Now, instead of the guilt and kind of frustration of throwing away packaging that is going to go to the landfill or somewhere else, you could feel good when you return the products and maybe even get something out of it, right? Like get a little treat, get a bonus of some kind. And so one of our favorite clients is Goop, Gwyneth Paltrow's brand. When you return your Boox Goop box, you get a discount code for a free gift when you buy something again from Goop. And so it's this very virtuous cycle, which is that the consumer gets a little positive nudge to go spend money on their site, right? We get our box back because the consumer wants to do it. They feel good about that whole process. Goop gets loyalty or additional purchasing, post-purchase engagement from this consumer. And then the cycle restarts. And so that's a good example where it's not just easier, but you're actually doing something that makes you feel good when you engage in this process. Importantly, we don't need to get all the boxes back to lower impact, and all of our products are designed to be recycled curbside if for some reason you don't return it, whether it's because lack of awareness that you don't know you're supposed to return it, you physically can't get to a return place, thing like that. You can put them in your curbside recycling bin. It's not as good environmentally as if you return it, but it's not bad either, right? It's not worse than recycling a cardboard box. And so that's been an important part of it, is aligning the incentives for everybody on this circle to participate. And not having it be a negative incentive. So I think, again, back to why some other competitors have failed, oftentimes they try to institute a deposit system, right? Like you pay a little bit more upfront, but when you return the product, you get your money back. That's a negative incentive, right? Now my product costs more upfront, and I kind of have to do the return in order to get my deposit back. It's not I want to do the return because I get a reward. It's I have to because I'm penalized if I don't do it. And so this is not only a negative incentive to buy that product, but it's a negative incentive to engage in circularity, right? Like these circular products now cost more than single-use products. That is not a good way to promote the whole idea, and the data suggests that it does not work. And so we've avoided these negative incentives from the beginning.
This is amazing way of explaining this, that negative incentives and positive incentives, and the way you have basically made this a win-win situation for both consumer brands and yourself. I think that really sums up how Boox is working, and that basically answers my question as well. So you mentioned you don't need to get all the boxes back. So Matt, what is current ratio of what is current, for example?
What's really interesting is that it varies wildly by brand. And so we have a few hundred brands using Boox products to ship and move things around. The return rates by brand range from under 5% to over 65%. And we can sort of hypothesize a bunch of different reasons why they might be such a big range. We know from based on some A/B testing that doing certain things does increase the rate of return. And so we think of them as priming, which is informing consumers of what's about to happen, incentives, and then nudging, which is reminding consumers what to do after they've received a reusable product. And so these are all very common things, right? You prime someone with an email that says, hey, your product's on the way, right? People are already, in most e-com companies, already do some version of this, right? Like, thanks for your order. Your product will be there in 3 days. Here's the tracking code. All we ask our brands to do is add, great news. This is coming in a reusable Boox box. Please return it once you receive it. And then, so now people say, okay, if they read it, okay, I have an idea that something's happening. You can do this on a website or on social media also, just understand that this brand is using a reusable packaging. When it arrives from inside the box directly, there's messaging that says, you're going to get a free gift when you return this, right? So another reminder, like, hey, remember when we said you were going to get a reusable thing? It's here now. And by the way, you get a gift when you return it. And then 3 days later, a week later, whatever it is, hey, did you return your box? It's time, right? And by the way, we hope you love your product and that you continue to shop with this brand. And so those three things, each of them can double the return rate for a given brand. Brands that don't do it, we don't force any of our companies to do it, but we try to tell them this is good for you, right? They're going to engage with your brand and spend more money. It's good for us. It's good for the planet. These are all aligned incentives. So those are all very effective. The companies with the highest return rates are subscription companies. And so the other kind of data or hypothesis that we have is that, and this is true for many things with consumer behavior, if you see it many times, you start to get it, right? And it might take you 5 times or 6 times before you say, oh, okay, I get it now. I have to return those. But then once you do it once, it's very easy to do it again. And so now that you know how it works, you know where your local drop-off point is to return your products, or just generally that it's going to happen, that, when you buy from this coffee company is a good example, this subscription coffee company, they're shipping in reusables. Okay, great. I like that. I'm going to return mine. And with subscription companies that have frequent subscriptions, like a week or every month, you could build up 5 or 10 of these and return them all at once. Right. So it's a little different than if you buy, a product once a year from a brand, and you have this one time that you have to get all this messaging, you have to understand circular economy, understand what to do, and then hopefully return the reusables. And then maybe a year later you buy something else from this company. That's a little bit harder to kind of win over people's awareness and get them.
Yeah, I totally get it. I think you have to say it multiple times, and this is more of a marketing strategy that a lot of brands have to implement, right? So you have to keep talking about it, only then your customers will know it. This is
about anything, right? It's true for any marketing message. The more times you can, times you can get people in front of it, the more likely it sticks.
Absolutely. So now you've shared amazing analogy behind what's really driving the recoverability ratio of Boox, and which I find it really interesting how you have broken down and you've analyzed like what's really is the motivation behind, and you're also helping brand with that knowledge that how you can also increase your recoverability of your boxes as well. So Matt, so we have talked about it. There have been many brands who have tried to do this but unsuccessfully. Is there currently any competition you see in the market on the similar lines?
There's certainly competitors. There's nobody that does exactly what we do, I would say. If you think more broadly, are there competitors to sustainable packaging? Sure. There's all sorts of different ways you could think about that. There's compostable, there's recyclable. I think most people learned at some point in their lives the hierarchy of reduce, reuse, recycle. Typically, compost is one notch below that, right? And it's not as catchy, but rot, right? If you're using all the R's, reduce, reuse, recycle, rot. And the challenge there is that it's not a circular economy, right? Those things that are being composted are releasing the CO2 and the carbon that are inside of them back into the atmosphere somehow. So it's really single use. And I think if you're trying to market compostability as circular, it's misleading and it's greenwashing. Even some types of recycling, I think, calling it circular is borderline. There's a circular materials, which is great. But if you try to pass it off as reuse, I think it's misleading. So there's competitors in that sense. There's a couple of examples of reusable packaging that are designed to be generic containers that could ship anything. That's probably the closest competitor that we have, and there's a few of those brands. There's several in the EU. There's 1 or 2 in the US that have had a little bit of scale. I hope I'm not patting myself on the back too much, but I think we've beaten out most of them in terms of scale and volume because we had this sort of hybrid approach, which is that we know that our clients want beautiful customization because the packaging is really important, right? It's really important to their brands. We know that they need low cost. So we know that they can't change their operations for a new type of physical container. And so I think those are some of the pitfalls that competitors have fallen into, is that they say, oh, here's a generic container, but you can use it 1,000 times if you get it back every time. And brands will say, well, are you getting it back every time? And they say, no, but we will eventually. And I hope that that's true, right? But it's just the missing piece is that consumers aren't doing it. And so if you can't get it back, the thing's not reusable.
And again, I think this relates to what I was saying earlier. You also mentioned it, that it's convenient to throw it in a bin than to walk out of your home and just drop it somewhere from where it can be picked. So it totally makes sense. So Matt, about sustainability, since we have crossed that line a lot of times, and I see that you focus a lot on data and analysis when working with Boox as well. So would you like to share the sustainability impact Boox has been able to bring? Like maybe there are things like carbon tax in some countries, and there is, of course, you mentioned that recyclability, reusability, those are like different things, and of course Boox has a separate focus. You want to focus specifically on circular economy. So is there any impact numbers you'd like to share with me?
Sure. Yeah. Generally speaking, we've been able to demonstrate for clients that switch to Boox and have some amount of scale, 10,000 plus shipments a year is kind of the baseline. We can reduce their overall impact of their packaging by 70 to 90% or more in some cases because of the reusability of the product. The thing that often trips people up or that is hard to comprehend if you're not deep into LCA analyses all the time is that a lot of consumers there, and we've talked to people about this quite a bit, their initial impression is that, okay, well, so if this thing needs to go back to a place to be used again, isn't that process of moving it back there impactful? Isn't that going to create emissions and transportation costs and everything else? Yes, but the cost of transporting something for most physical products, and some people can check me on these numbers, the vast majority of the impact of the life cycle of the product is in production. It's not in transportation, it's not in use, it's in production. So if you manufacture a car or if you manufacture a box, most of the impact of the lifetime of that product is in the production cycle. Taking raw materials, synthesizing them, putting them together, the energy used to do that. Cars, actually, it's funny, I say that now, cars maybe emissions for internal combustion vehicles might be more over the lifetime of a car, depending on how long you use it. But generally speaking, most physical products, the impact, the majority, like 75% plus, comes from the production. Transportation, and we've dug into this very carefully for boxes, obviously, transportation in the life cycle of a box is less than 2% of the total impact of the life cycle of the box. And so if you can imagine a pie where 75 or 90% of the pie is production costs, and when I say cost, I mean environmental impact, 2%, a teeny sliver, is transportation, and the rest is in the life cycle, the use throughout the life of the product. If you could replace production of box number 2 with transportation of box number 1, you're significantly reducing the lifetime impact of the product. And so our goal is to do it over and over again, right? So instead of this box being shipped somewhere and then you make a new one, try to do this, and then you make a new one, and then it goes again, and then you make a new one, and then it goes again. Okay, now we've produced 3 boxes, right? Imagine the scale of e-commerce, 20 billion shipments in the US, right? So we're manufacturing 20 billion boxes and shipping them. Now imagine if this box goes here, and then it's transported back, and then it's shipped again, right? So now we've had 2 shipments, but we've only made 1 box.
One box,
right?
Yeah.
Now do it 20 billion times, right? So the impact really starts to stack up when you realize that that second trip for the box, you're incurring 2% of the typical life cycle of the box instead of 75 or more percent. And so that is, the very basic principle of circular economy is use that thing again, don't make it again, right? Yeah. And most people don't understand, and they assume, well, when I move that thing from my home back to where it needs to go, I'm in, there's a truck on the road that's moving those things. A lot of people don't realize when you recycle something, right, or when you throw something in the trash, guess what happens? A truck picks it up and takes it somewhere also, right? And in many cases, it's probably taking it further than if a thing had to be reused again. Until very recently, most of the recycling in the US was being shipped overseas to go somewhere else. Yeah. And so there's a huge amount of transportation costs in recycling and in waste management. And so it's not as big of a trade-off as most people understand, or most people imagine if you're not entrenched in waste management and circular economy.
Yeah. I think it makes perfect sense. And the way you have explained it, how instead of producing three boxes, we are just now producing one box, and we are just taking care of the shipment three times instead of otherwise, which would have been like a huge waste, uh, is now you already reduced by 60%, right?
One example that I think people tend to understand very well, actually, cars are a pretty good example too of reuse, which people don't really think about. Almost everybody, in certainly that I've known in my life, has purchased a used car at some point. Right? You don't always buy a new car, if ever. A lot of people never buy a new car. That is a great example of reuse. Somebody bought the car for its full value when it was new, used it for some period of time, got tired of it, wanted a new one, it's got problems, whatever it is. Someone else will buy that car for less than the original purchase price, but still something, or there's still value in the car. And there could be 5 owners before the car reaches end of life, right? And so that's a similar concept. Steel shipping containers, overseas freight containers are another great example. Most people can envision a shipping container on a ship moving from, oftentimes from China to the US or the other way. When those containers get to the US, we don't throw them away. Right? There's still a lot of value in the container, and the process of disposing of it would be wasteful, right? But it's really that there's actual monetary value in using it again. And so you design the containers where they can be used again, and maybe thousands of times, right? Because if it needs to travel overseas, you can't make it out of cardboard, right? It would be destroyed on the way. So it needs to be steel or very strong. When they get to the other side, they also don't move them around empty if they can avoid it, right? Because it costs money to move them empty. And so you refill that container and you send it back to somewhere else overseas. And it could go to Europe, or it could go to South America, or somewhere else, right? Full of different products in many cases. And so those are two great examples, very different examples of circular economy, where the product still has value, even though you're done with it, right? You're personally done with it. Someone else will find value in it. And there's enough value to justify the logistics of moving it somewhere to be used again.
Yeah. But I think this makes perfect sense, and how all of this is basically contributes into the circular economy. And shipping container example is, I think it fits perfectly, that you just don't throw away such a huge metal box. Then why would you throw, right, a small box as well?
This is just a smaller version, right? This is just a smaller version of a shipping container. There's some differences obviously, but the principle still applies.
Okay. So Matt, now that we were already talking about sustainability, so how are you able to correlate this for your customers related to maybe some regulations? Are there some regulations in place in US or Europe that you are able to communicate to your customer, that you will be able to align with those?
Yeah, there's actually several bits of legislation. I'd say the EU is further, more progressive than the US in many ways. I mean, we don't need to get into politics in the US right now, but I think that there's a variety of legislation, actually almost everywhere else in the world except for the US, that is pushing forward, increased rate of recyclability, of reusability, making sure that brands are making claims that are correct and backed by data. And so I think that the ones that are coming down the pipe, especially, are in the EU that are most relevant for us because we operate in that market already. There's a couple in the U.S. that are, and they're mostly here where we are in California, which tends to be progressive about this kind of thing as well, that are going to require higher levels of, or a different way of saying it, less single-use items, fewer single-use items in the world. And so I think that it will happen eventually. There'll be an inflection point, and I do think that legislation is going to be required to really force real change, lasting change. But that usually follows consumer behavior as well, right? Consumers demand it. Legislation says, okay, we have to do it. And so I do think that is coming, but it's still several years away, at least in the US. There's signs of it in other countries for sure. Ultimately, I believe that it's helpful, and it will be like the thing that forces it everywhere. But using market economics and making sure it makes sense from a financial point of view is the other way to get companies to do it. And that, at the end of the day, is the thing that they are working towards. If you're a business, part of what you need to do is be profitable and make money. And so I think that it is more about generating value or saving costs for these companies in some way, which is sometimes tricky to measure, than it is about waiting for legislation to force it. So yeah, we're actually, for a number of companies in California, and these are large companies, public companies that are looking ahead multiple years and are thinking about how to future-proof their businesses for when legislation does happen. right? They don't want to be the, if you're doing a billion shipments a year, you can't wait until the last minute to change your operations to comply. And so larger companies are starting to think on this 3 or 5 year timeline about how to comply, how to future proof. And we are oftentimes a solution where a company like that will reach out and say, okay, we're starting to think about this. We're not ready to switch yet, but we know we're going to have to. Show us what we can do and how to meet these regulations. And so it's exciting. It's an exciting time for this entire industry. Can't happen fast enough, frankly. But it is exciting, even in the time since we started the company, the new kind of push, the new zeitgeist, the general consumer behavior change has started to lead in this direction. So feeling optimistic, but yeah, it's got to happen faster.
Yes, I really like your optimistic behavior about everything. And actually, I think in terms of sustainability, Europe usually is on the lead. They are very active in bringing out new legislation, and usually other countries, they just follow suit as soon as Europe does it, or sometimes they even take many years before Europe has already something already is being happening in Europe, but maybe it happens after 5 years in US, or after maybe
Well,
10 years in other countries.
although
Yeah.
I will say one of the really interesting things, and say what you will about countries where there's a government that can just decide what to do.
Mm.
But there's many Asian countries that have enacted rules or laws because they can just say, okay, this is the rule now. And I'm generalizing like crazy, but I mean, this is the rule now and everybody has to comply. There's a lot less, in the US, there's arguing and debating, and almost always, there's not just one entity that can say, here's what we're going to do now. It has to be agreed upon by the supermajority. And I think that that's maybe one of the ways that this is going to happen in some other places, is that it's just the law now, right? Like this is
Yeah.
just now how we have to handle this, because they can see the damage of trash on the streets or emissions in the air, and it's like this is not a let's debate the pros and cons of climate action. It's like our people are unhealthy, and we need to
Mm.
change the rules to make sure that they won't be, right, that their children will have a healthy planet. And so, yeah, I generally agree. The EU tends to be progressive about this type of legislation, but it's not the only place. I mean, it's every continent in the world is thinking about things like this and making positive change.
Yeah, it's happening slowly with different speeds at different locations, but yeah,
Yep,
people are getting
absolutely.
there. Okay, so apart from this, Matt, now I'd like to know about Boox's future plans of what's the basically next challenge that Boox wants to take on.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think we've recently started to expand outside of what was our core business for 4 years now, or 4 or 5 years now, which is e-commerce packaging. So the original vision was, or not even vision, but like kind of our go-to-market strategy was that there's these brands that care a lot about the messaging that they send, and it's easier for them to switch to a new idea, pioneer something, because it's part of their ethos, right? To be able to say, oh, we're pioneering more sustainable packaging, or we're pioneering circular packaging. Smaller, more nimble brands can do that. And especially direct to consumer brands where the packaging is a big part of their brand message, right? Maybe they don't have a storefront. And so to get their brand message across, it's actually physically on the packaging, right? Here, this is I love this one. This is a beautiful box. And that's part of it, right? When you receive a product from this company, you are excited, and you're, this is a really nice experience. And by the way, it's sustainable, right? And that's kind of part of their messaging. We actually had this client, maybe I won't show their box actually, but they said, we want to switch to Boox. It looks great. The boxes are beautiful. And we start into okay, and here's how you reduce your impact. And they go, oh, they're sustainable. Great. And so like there's something about just the kind of look, feel, and brand message that's so important for e-commerce
Yeah.
brands, especially. Whereas if if you have a storefront, you're less concerned about the packaging that goes with your products, because you're getting a brand message across in store, right? Or with that consumer experience in store. And so I think that's as we expand into larger household name companies, the logistics become more challenging. The scale becomes more challenging, and proud of where we've gotten to, but there's a whole nother layer of scale and kind of operational complexity that comes with a company. There's a global shoe company that we're working with that is one of the Fortune 100 companies in the US, and has incredibly complex operations. And so learning how to get in there is probably one of our next big
Mm.
challenges. Expanding to other regions is very much on the top of our minds. We currently operate in the US, UK, and Canada. Japan is a market that we're really interested in. We've been told by many people that it's a concept that generally in the culture of Japanese people in Japan, it is the idea of reusing things and reducing waste and getting the most out of your resources is already there. More so than other places. And so, that is a big part of figuring out where we go next is the local people, or back to the idea of consumer behavior, have to embrace it in order for it to work. And if there's already a culture of conservation of materials, it should be a lot easier, right, for it to take off. And so honestly, I think by starting in the US, we probably started one of the hardest markets. Which is good. Again, it builds its muscles, it builds resilience. But I suspect there's probably other countries where the concept of reuse and circularity might take off faster than it has here.
Yes. And yeah, I think I can see Japan being very open about it because they're very serious about sustainability, waste, and
Right.
so I think maybe that could be an easier market. So Matt, with that, this is the question that I again wanted, and I think I already have the answer to this, but I'll still ask away. During your work with Boox and from start to end, has there been moments where you felt that maybe this is not going to work, or maybe this is very tough, maybe like giving up moment? Even though I said I already know the answer, but I'd still like to hear it from you.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's with any business, with any small business or startup business, there's moments like that. We've had not that many of them, which is good. I think that it's there's more challenges ahead, no doubt. We have not, we are not at the end. We have not won. We're still very small in terms of the percentage of market share or market penetration in the regions that we operate. I think we've beaten out some competition, and that feels great. We've had some really big milestones every year, and this is one thing I say to other founders that are doing this: keep celebrating those milestones, because you tend to sort of forget as you grow. I remember we celebrated the time we shipped 10 boxes, right? The very first 10, and then we celebrated 1,000, and then we celebrated 2,500, and then we celebrated 10,000, and then we celebrated 1,000,000 pretty soon after that. And then we didn't notice when we did 2 million. And we have a counter, we have a shipment counter. And I think we were at like 2.3 million. And someone said, oh, hey, we crossed 2 million. I said, oh, great. Okay, let's get to 5, right? And like that's, you have to celebrate those milestones because it's a big deal. And sitting down with the team recently, we said, hey, do you guys know, like in this period, we shipped the first ever reusable e-commerce product, reusable e-commerce box 5 years ago. Then we shipped 1 million, and it had never been done before. Those are the first 1 million of this thing. And that's going from 0 to 1 million of anything is worth celebrating, right? Whatever it is, and making sure that you're keeping positive about those milestones and identifying them and calling out team members when they do something positive, even if it's small. I really find that to be motivating, and kind of, don't forget about that you start at 0 when you get to 5 million. Right, and make sure you celebrate all those milestones. I don't know if that answered your question, but you can tell I'm pretty optimistic. I think the question was, were there hard parts? And I'm saying yes, but
Yes.
There's some great parts too.
Yeah, that is the answer I had, that you're a very optimistic person and you look at things very systematically and you know what you're doing. And I think all of those are really great traits of a good founder or CEO. And I've done these interviews with a lot of CEO and founder, that this is a common, I could say, trait I found, that not giving up attitude is what kept them going. And of course, for some, say they have been a lot of moments, but usually people pull through, and this is what I find very motivating. So,
well, and there's many failed startups, right? And again, I wouldn't say that we've won yet. I mean, we've had some success, but it's still very early stages. And so I think, reminding yourselves that if you've made any progress whatsoever, you're still, further along than hundreds of thousands of other startups that failed or never got going. And even that is a win of some kind, right? You can't rest on your laurels, but that's a win already. And so making sure you focus on that instead of the hard times will get you through those hard times too.